Welcome everyone to our free GMAT Verbal webinar. Whether you're here for the first time or you've been to one of our webinars before, thanks for joining us. My name is Andrew and I'm one of the student success advisors here at Ready4. I consult with our students, connecting them with the courses that best suit their needs, and I'm happy to be hosting today's webinar to give you all a chance to meet one of our talented instructors. So let's get started. A couple of things to know before we begin. You're all muted, so depending on where you are, anything you say out loud might look crazy to those around you, but it won't get our attention. Instead, take a minute to find the question box. This is going to be an important tool for you today. Any questions you have about the content of today's lesson, the GMAT in general, or about our courses, you can type those right into the question box and we'll either respond to you directly or during our Q&A session at the end. Also, when it's time to cast your vote, as we're doing in-class examples, you're going to type your answer into that box as well. We'll be sharing these slides, answer explanations, and a handout exploring our services at the end, so don't forget to download those as well. And finally, this session is being recorded, so be on the lookout for our follow-up email after class if you'd like to view the recording or the handouts, especially if you're tuning in now from your mobile device. Okay, here's what we're going to cover today. I'll start by telling you a little about what we do here at Ready4. Then I'm going to pass things off so you can see one of our experts in action. While these free webinars aren't going to teach you everything that you need to know for the exam, they provide a solid intro to the test and a chance to meet one of our instructors and get an idea of what our courses are like. I promise that whatever stage you're at in your GMAT prep, though, you're going to take away some strategies today that you can apply and continue to improve on throughout the rest of your practice. If you enjoy the session, stay to the end and I'll jump back on and provide a little bit more information about our courses. We even have a special surprise to say thanks for being here, and that's going to be at the end of this session today. All right, a little bit about us. Ready4 was started out of MIT back in 2013, and our goal ever since has been to make test prep more affordable and accessible for students. That's why we offer a number of different prep options based on your needs and based on your budget as you prepare for the exam, ranging from our top-ranked practice tools designed to measure and adapt to your performance, so they're better than any book, to our fully immersive prep courses, whether on demand or live with the best instructors in the industry. We're providing a flexible, mobile-led learning experience to fit the needs of any student, regardless of your location and your background. But I'll talk a little bit more about our services at the end. Right now, I want to introduce you to your instructor before we start our lesson. Today's session will be led by Richard. Richard has an 800 score on the GMAT. He has 15 years of experience preparing students for the test. Students really love Richard's straightforward approach and the way he methodically breaks down problems. He has a ton of content knowledge, and you're going to see that in this lesson today. So I'll pass things over to Richard now, but remember, if you have anything I can help you with, I'm right at the other end of that question box, so just let me know. Thanks everyone, good luck.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Can you, yes, thanks. There we go. Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks for that warm introduction. My name is Richard. So I've been teaching for Ready4 GMAT for about a year now, and definitely really excited to be able to reach out to people, not just in the US, but all over the world. So I'm located here in Chicago, but in the past I've had students from as far away as Kenya, Singapore, Taiwan, the Netherlands, Colombia, Peru, some exotic country called Canada. It's actually been pretty fun. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more in just a moment. While I'm doing that, please feel free to introduce yourself in the questions box. So tell me a little bit maybe about yourself, where you're located, just anything like that, so I kind of know who I'm talking to. So yeah, I'm from Indiana originally, although I am, like I said, in Chicago currently. I went to Indiana University, majored in physics and mathematics. I also went to Stanford for graduate school and got a master's in applied physics, so I have quite a strong quant background. Moved to Asia in 2000 and was teaching TOEFL, SAT, GRE, LSAT, a little bit of MCAT, SAT2, SSAT, kind of the whole alphabet soup of tests. But I really found my niche with GMAT GMAT is, someone from India. GMAT's really my specialty. It's the test that I've taught the most. I've probably taught at least 300 full classes, working for 3 different companies. Yes. Also, I've taught hundreds of students one-on-one, and basically have tons of experience teaching it. I've taken the test itself 3 times, the official exam, gotten 750, 770, and 800, as mentioned before. The time I got 800, I did get a perfect 51 in math and 51 in verbal. So I feel like I can safely say that I've kind of cracked the code of what makes things right and wrong on GMAT. So I got my own MBA in Thailand at Assumption University with the concentration in finance. I've also passed all 3 levels of the CFA program, and I'm hoping to earn my CFA charter soon. And I relocated back to the U.S. a couple years ago, and have been teaching here ever since. So that's my story. So just checking in with the questions. Okay, got a couple people from India already. Awesome. And staff will be responding to you one by one individually, so I will be more free to focus on the lesson. Anyway, so the idea here is I'm going to talk a little bit about GMAT, just kind of in overall terms. Many of you are probably familiar with the GMAT already. That's why you're here. For some of you, though, it may be new, so I will try to go through just the basics at least. And then I'm going to dive into the lesson on critical reasoning, and try to show you what they care about at GMAT when they write the questions. So one obstacle I think a lot of people have, especially in the verbal, is that you might have your own opinions about what you think is right or wrong, which is nice, but it really doesn't matter for GMAT. What only matters is what GMAT thinks is right and wrong. And you can safely trust that because I got a perfect score, I can tell you some reliability what they consider right, what they consider wrong for any particular type of question. So anyway, so basically my idea here is to try to share with you sort of the basics of the patterns, at least for critical reasoning. And then if you take the full course, we do that for all the areas, reading and sentence corrections as well. So anyway, let me move on. So the test is now a little bit shorter than it used to be. So now it's around 3 hours, 62 minutes for quant. Let's see if I got my little beeper going. Yeah, 62 minutes for quant and 31 questions. Oh, it's backwards. Okay, 65 minutes for verbal and 36 questions here. And you can change the order of whether you do math first or verbal first. You also have some control over whether you do the math and the verbal first, and then the AWA and IR, or if you do the AWA and IR first, and then the math and the verbal. Just so you're aware, so the math and the verbal score are the only scores that count towards your total GMAT score. The AWA writing sample, the essay, is actually a totally separate score, as is the the integrated reasoning. That's also a separate score. So my recommendation is do the math and the verbal first because they give you the total GMAT score. They're more important. Save the essay and the IR for last. They get their own separate numbers. Okay, I'm just keeping an eye on the questions boxes as people are entering comments. So the GMAT is an adaptive test. So that has a couple different ramifications. One is that they will give you questions one by one, and then based on your performance, it'll choose your subsequent questions based on that, either harder or easier. Generally speaking, and when you get more questions right, the test will try to move you to harder levels of questions, and then, in other words, to try to challenge you. If you get questions wrong, it will tend to move down in difficulty to give you easier questions in order to see exactly where that floor is. So when you are moving through the test, you have to do all the questions one by one in order. There's no skipping questions, there's no leaving questions blank, and there's no going backwards. Okay, so one of the reasons that GMAT is such a tough test is because you don't have any kind of strategy where you can say, oh, I'm going to do the easier questions first, skip the hard questions, come back to them later on if I have extra time. That's a strategy that works well in many contexts, like if you're taking an exam in school maybe. But on the GMAT, you can't do that because the way it's set up, they have to choose the questions one by one in order based on what you've done so far. So you really have to kind of drill down on, either knowing how to do the questions, or if you don't know how to do the question, at least spot a pattern where you can look at what you do know in the question and use that to eliminate answer choices and do some educated guessing. It's definitely a key survival skill. And of course, because the test is a little bit shorter now than it used to be, it's slightly more important you keep your pacing kind of going level. Overall, you have about 2 minutes per question on average. So you want to kind of stick with that. It's okay if you go over a little bit here and there, because some questions go faster, some questions go slower. That's okay as an average. But you don't want to fall behind too much because the test is shorter. It's going to be a little bit hard to catch up on time if you do fall behind. So I think I've already covered these points. Basically, you do need to finish the entire test. Actually, that's one more point. They do penalize you for not finishing the exam. You know, if you only get to question number 25 on the math out of 31 questions, basically it'll prorate your score by taking the 6 questions you left blank, divided by 31, and whatever that is, that would be approximately 20%, I think. They would just deduct 20% from your score. So it's actually a pretty strong penalty. Make sure that you do finish the exam and get all the way to the end. Ignoring the apparent difficulty. So the difficulty does matter, of course. Harder questions are harder, but you also have to realize that what's easy or difficult is sort of subjective. It does depend on you. Like what you think is easy versus what you think is hard is definitely not necessarily the same as what the test thinks is easy or what the test thinks is hard. And in general, you can kind of overthink things by, geez, this is so annoying. You can definitely overthink things by looking at a question saying, oh, this is hard, so I'm doing good, or this is easy, so I'm doing really bad. That's actually kind of a waste of time. Really, the only thing you should be thinking about is why is this answer right? Why is this answer wrong? You know, what do I need to do to finish this question with a high percentage guess so I can move on to the next question? You need to stay focused on the content, not how you are doing or your performance. And then, of course, with practice, so we do have the Ready For app, which you guys have already been introduced to. The course that I teach is about 6 weeks long with 8 sessions of classes. And we do go through pretty much the entire GMAT, 50-50 between math and verbal. And then you can do all the homework in the app from that class. I also recommend doing content from the official guide for GMAT Review, which is published by the test makers. And of course, doing as many practice tests as you can before the real test day. Okay, so that's kind of my overview of the GMAT itself. Let me let me get into the critical reasoning now. So there's 3 main areas in the verbal. So you have, excuse me, I'm going to try to do a little bit of writing here on the screen. So you have, there we go. You have the sentence corrections. Aha, this is pretty good. Okay, actually, let me write the whole thing. So we got that up on the screen. We got sentence corrections, we have critical reasoning, and we have reading comprehension. So since the test got shorter, they took out about 6 questions from the verbal. Almost all of the questions they took out of the test were from sentence corrections and critical reasoning. So the reading comprehension is now going to be a bigger percentage of the test than it used to be. Critical reasoning is still going to be the same. Oh, no, it's not. It's going to be a little bit lower. About 9 to 11 questions will be critical reasoning in the verbal section. So then within critical reasoning, you have a variety of different question types. Weaken and strengthen are definitely some of the most common. And then also assumption questions, which is the focus of this current lesson. Assumption questions are really sort of the key to unlocking weaken and strengthen, because it's by going through the assumption you can determine how to weaken or how to strengthen an argument. So let me show you a little bit about how that works now. So basically, when you look at an argument on the GMAT, so excuse me, when I use the word argument in this context, there's lots of different meanings of the word argument in the real world, but the meaning in this context is something like a line of reasoning, right? So it's like a sequence of statements that, you know, force you to accept later statements based on earlier statements. I mean, I'll just give a silly math example, which I'm sure should make sense. If you know that x is more than y and y is more than z, then you can continue that line of reasoning to prove something else. You can prove that x is more than z, for instance. And so that's kind of the concept of an argument. But in the verbal context, this will be various statements about, you know, a company, a country, a city, whatever, maybe a scientific study or something like that. And then generally speaking, the different parts of the argument will have names. Okay, So let me jump down here to the bottom first. So the conclusion is the main idea. Or you can just say it's the main point. That's another way of describing it. I just want to point out that with my little math example here, x is greater than z is the conclusion. It's the main point. It's the thing you can prove based on the statements above. But in English, in verbal, when you're speaking, sometimes your main point actually comes at the beginning. So maybe you state your main point, and afterwards you give the reasons why to try to back that up. Or sometimes you start with your reasons, and then you arrive at the main point as a conclusion. So I just want you guys to be careful when you say the conclusion for GMAT arguments. The main point might be at the beginning, it might be at the end, depending upon the question type. It might even be in one of the 5 answer choices. So the way that you make that decision is always based on the logic, right? And so the real key here is you should always be asking yourself why. Like, so with this example, why should I believe that x is greater than z? Well, because x is more than y and y is greater than z, therefore x is greater than z. So whenever you're looking at the main point, it's got to be something where if you look at that, you can ask why, and then point to some other information in the argument. What is that other information called? Those are the premises. So premises are the reasons why. Okay. Now over here we have evidence. What is evidence? Well, evidence is also reasons why. And the slight difference here is that premises in general tend to be more kind of general statements, whereas evidence tends to be more specific statistics or facts about a particular thing. But in terms of how they're being used within the line of reasoning, they're both going to work as support. Okay. So where does the assumption come in? Well, this center box here in the middle, it's actually kind of grayed out. That's actually not a typo or anything like that. You know, it says assumptions, the authors. So what's going on here? Well, a couple things. So first of all, assumptions are often unstated. Okay. Actually, sometimes people will say that maybe the assumptions are too obvious. I've done these types of problems in class many times and worked with students who we do an assumption question and they will cross out the right answer sometimes. And I'll ask them, why'd you do that? Why'd you cross out that answer? That's definitely the assumption. And they'll say, oh, it just seemed too obvious. It just, you know, and I'm like, well, no, that's what makes it the assumption. It's a thing that you need to know in order for the thing to be true. And so with assumptions, just to be careful with assumptions. Assumptions can be true or false. You don't necessarily know because there's actually no outside knowledge required for critical reasoning on the GMAT. If they are talking about some imaginary company X, you know, there are no facts in the real world about company X, right? All you have is what's supplied to you within the question. And if you start making assumptions and, you know, basically making up information that you believe is true, but without being stated in the argument, you might run into trouble. So the purpose of being critical, of course, is you want to find that information that you would like to be true, would hope to be true, maybe in some sense, but actually hasn't been provided in the argument. Okay, so it's essentially like, in some sense, it's kind of like the missing information that you need to make things go. So for instance, if I gave you an argument like this, let me go back to my mathematical example. So let's say I told you that A is bigger than B, and B is bigger than C. Then I said, therefore, A is bigger than D. Right? Well, this is kind of a tricky argument, and it's definitely not really valid from a mathematical point of view because you do have some information missing. I mean, we know that A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, so in theory, we would know that A is bigger than C, but what about D? We actually don't have any information about that. And so what is the assumption? Well, the assumption's got to focus on this new piece of information and try to figure out how to connect it back with all the previous information. And so an assumption might look something like this, and I think you guys are probably already ahead of me at this point. Maybe the assumption might say that C is greater than D. And that would be something that we need to know, right? We need to know if C is greater than D That's actually what's required in order for this line of reasoning to continue and go in the same order. Okay. So let me make one more statement about assumptions, and then we'll go to an example. As I said a moment ago, assumptions can be true or they can be false. You actually don't know. So for instance, based on the stuff I've written in blue here about A, B, and C, you actually have no information about whether C is more than D or not. Okay. Now you might find that in one of the answer choices, in which case you want to pick that answer choice. But based on just the information in blue, you wouldn't actually know whether C is bigger than D. And so if it's true, that's actually kind of the best case scenario. That would strengthen the argument. It would actually show you that A is in fact more than D. On the other hand, if it was false, you'd have big problems. Like if I find out that D was bigger than C, then all of a sudden the logic breaks down and you're not able to connect these statements in this way. And that would actually weaken the argument. So identifying the assumptions is really pivotal for weaken and strengthen questions, because if the assumption is true, that'll strengthen. If the assumption is false, that'll weaken. So it lets you do both, essentially, either strengthen or weaken if you've identified the correct assumption. Okay, so here is an example, and let me just see which one is bigger on the screen. Yeah, okay, so this one's actually slightly bigger on the screen. So let's check this out. So you have a nice long argument. So what I'd like you guys to do here is I'll take about 60 seconds, let you guys read it, and you guys can type in your answer into the question box. So number one is, what is the main point of the argument? And then number two is, what are the reasons why? Once we have that established, then together we'll go on and talk about the assumption. Okay, so I'm gonna turn off myself for a second so you can see a little bit bigger on the screen. I'll give you guys about 60 seconds. Okay, so you can type in your answer in your own words. What is the main point of the argument? That's number one. And number two, what is the reason why? So, okay, so one person has said that that his father was the least affluent And that is a claim that they make. That's true. It's not actually the main point. So they do use the fact that he is likely the least affluent. Maybe the claim. But they do it to establish the main point. So another person said that the main point is that Edmund Spencer attended a merchant school in London. So that's actually that's given as factual information. So they use a phrase like "we know that." It means it is background information, right? So the question is, how is that being used to support a broader point? So notice here at the beginning, there's kind of a question. And they say that we have Edmund Spencer, right? But we don't know who his parents are. Yes, so that is correct. So the main point is that John Spencer is Edmund Spencer's father. Yes. So this is kind of set up as the initial thing. Then we do get a couple facts. Right. So one fact is that John Spencer was the least affluent of the three different Spencers. So basically it's kind of a process of elimination. We've got three different guys: Robert Spencer, Nicholas Spencer, and John Spencer. Any one of those three guys could have been Edmund Spencer's father, just based on the name, right? But they're giving us a specific fact about John Spencer, that since he was a journeyman clockmaker, that he would have been the least affluent, and therefore, in other words, is saying the least wealthy. Then we have another fact, and this is a fact about Edmund, that Edmund attended the school at a reduced fee. Right. So we're putting this all together to try to reach this main point that John Spencer was Edmund Spencer's father. And before you go on, you definitely should use the Y test here to make sure that this makes sense. So if we look at the main point, that John Spencer was Edmund Spencer's father, you definitely can ask why. Why should we believe that? Why should we believe that John was Edmund's father? Because Edmund attended school at a reduced fee, and John Spencer was the least affluent of Robert, Nicholas, and John Spencer. So those give us reasons to think that John Spencer was Edmund Spencer's father. Now, any question about that before we jump into the assumption? Okay, so the next issue is, what else do we need to know? Because we've got these two facts which are helpful. They definitely are evidence in some way that shows that John Spencer is Edmund Spencer's father, but I wouldn't say that they're necessarily proof, right? They're not like 100% definitive that John was Edmund Spencer's father. So when you think about the assumption, you need to start thinking about what's missing, or what else do you need to know that would help establish that these facts are connected to the conclusion, connected to whether John Spencer is Edmund Spencer's father. And There's a lot of different types of assumptions on GMAT, but certainly the biggest is cause and effect. Right? So when you're looking at facts like this, whether you realize it or not, your brain is always operating in the background, looking for relationships, looking for cause and effect. And maybe you didn't even realize it, but if you look at these two facts, they're really not related. One's about John, one's about Edmund, but your brain starts connecting them in kind of subtle ways. And that's the assumption. Well, if you can figure out what that is, that's the assumption. So let me just point out that this is set in London in the 1560s. So, you know, more than 450 years ago, essentially. And so your outside knowledge about the way tuition and academic fees work today may not be relevant to London in the 16th century. So like today, it's certainly true that if you have financial hardship or some kind of financial need and you want to go to school, you might be able to get a reduction in the fees, you might be able to get some kind of loan or some kind of financial aid package. But that's today in the modern world. Did that exist back in London in the 1560s, 1570s? You really don't know. That could be true, maybe it's not true. But that's where you're moving into the assumption. So what do we need to know as an assumption? So I'm going to split this up into two parts. So part one is that the fact that he's the least affluent is the reason why Edmund Spencer got the reduced fee. I'm actually going to split this into another part as well. The second part is that there was no other reason. So think about why we need to know this. So we do know as a fact that Edmund attended the reduced fee. We actually don't know why he got the reduced fee, right? But if we use this assumption, we can find out why. According to the assumption, he got the reduced fee because his father was the least affluent member of the Merchants Tailors Guild. Okay, and so that would explain why he got the reduced fee. That also helps understand that it was John Spencer was the one that was his father, because we know that John was the one who was the least affluent. And then part two here would say that there's no other reason. Okay, that this is the one reason and the only possible reason why he got the reduced fee. Okay, so moving on from that, the next question is, how would you weaken this argument? And go ahead, please type your answer in the question box. This is not a multiple choice example, so you don't get to pick a letter. You have to actually explain in your own words. How would you weaken this argument? Yeah, so that's, and that is a good example. So one person said that the reduced fee was based on merit. And let me say that I would consider that an example of how to weaken, but you can also generalize and say like any other reason for the reduced fee. So someone else came up with something a little bit more creative about how maybe John Spencer did not have a son, which would definitely disagree with the conclusion, but it's not about the assumption. Right? Like it doesn't incorporate the facts about the fee. So like once you've been given a piece of information that, you know, Edmund Spencer attended the school to reduced fee, and you've been given that, if you want to weaken the argument, you can't just come up with something brand new. You have to at least explain why he got the reduced fee, even if it's only to show that it does not prove that John Spencer was his father. Okay, that's another good example. Yes. Mm-hmm. So another person came up with an example saying that maybe because Robert Spencer was a gentleman, and you know, a gentleman could get a reduced fee. Yes. Right. And that's anything in that same ballpark. If any way that you can attack this and come up with another reason for the reduced fee would weaken the argument. So a couple people have said, what was the first one we came up with? Based on the merit? Yeah. So if you can come up with another reason for the reduced fee, it can be because maybe he had some kind of financial merit. Even better would be saying that it's because the gentleman got the reduced fee, because then not only would you know that it was not John, you'd actually have a reason to think it was Robert instead. And that would be weakening even more, because it'd be moving even further away from the idea that John Spencer was his father. And so basically, in general, to weaken an argument, you want to provide an example or provide evidence that shows that the assumption is false. If the assumption is false, then that will show the conclusion is not valid, is not necessarily true based on the information given. Okay, so let's turn it around. One more pivot. How would you strengthen this argument? Yeah, while you guys are thinking about strengthen, someone came up with another good weaken example. Since Nicholas was the warden, he could get an equivalent to an employee discount. Right. So here you have this information that Nicholas was the guild's warden. And so maybe if that's the reason why, if the guild warden could get a reduced fee, an employee discount, yeah, then maybe Edmund was the one that got that discount, and therefore Edmund was Nicholas's son. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's another good example. So in broad terms, anything that gives you another reason for the reduced fee, but the good ones focus on the gentleman or the guild's warden as the reason for the reduced fee, because it switches from John to Robert or Nicholas. Okay, that was cool. Okay, so how about examples for strengthen? Well, one possibility would be that just take the answers that you gave. Okay, there's a comment I'm going to respond to in a moment. But the simplest way to strengthen is just take the answers that you gave for weaken and just reverse them. So let me try to switch it down to the color here. Yeah, there we go. So say something like this. Say that gentlemen. Sorry, it's really small here at the bottom of the screen. I'll try. But gentlemen did not get a reduced fee. A piece of information like this would strengthen the argument. If you just say, gentlemen did not get a reduced fee. So that would, if nothing else, it would knock out Robert. It still leaves open the door whether it's either Nicholas or John, but overall, it makes the odds for John go up from 33% to 50%, so it would strengthen. Yeah. And another version of this would be just say that they didn't give an employee's discount. So just take that answer earlier about the employee discount and just reverse it and just say they did not give an employee discount. That would also knock out Nicholas Spencer and make it more likely that John Spencer is the answer. Yeah. So typically with assumption, you just state the concept that the reduced fee was because his father was the least affluent and no other reason. That's the assumption. With strengthen and weaken, what you're doing is you're giving examples that will show that the assumption is true or false, right? So if you give an example of another possible reason for the reduced fee that would weaken, with strengthen, you also give an example, but you got to negate it and say they did not give gentlemen reduced fees, or they did not give the guild's warden an employee discount. And those would also be examples, but they would do it in a way that strengthens the assumption, shows the assumption is true, and then strengthens the argument. So let me just circle back to one of these comments. So this one says that the journeyman clothmaker is the least affluent of all the guild members. That's a claim used as support. It's not the assumption though. And because it doesn't tie to the reduced fee. And there definitely can be more than one assumption in their argument, don't get me wrong. But typically when they've laid out information, they've already given you the information as fact. It's London, it's the 1560s. Journeyman clothmaker, we're poor people. Those things are kind of considered facts for the purpose of this argument. You're not going to get much traction on trying to attack those, either or support them. You got to look at the assumption, you got to look at the stuff that's not stated. And then another comment was that Taylor School gave special discount to clothmakers. Yes, if you add in the journeyman with that. Right. Another answer was that they had a policy to support poor students. Yeah, but I think you guys are being a little bit too direct, to be quite honest. Like an answer choice on a strengthened question that says they gave a reduced fee to children of poor parents, or poor children of journeyman clothmakers, something like that. That would technically support, and I'm not going to say it's wrong, because it would support this part one of the assumption that the least affluent got the reduced fee. However, it's a little bit too direct. It's a little bit too simplistic for GMAT to come up as the correct answer on the medium level questions or the hard level questions. So the more devious weaken answer is the one that says that, strengthen answer is the one that says the gentleman did not get a reduced fee. That's the more likely kind of answer that you see on a strengthen question, where what they do is they pluck out one example that would weaken, and then they say that example is not true or that didn't happen. So they'd say, oh, well, maybe the gentleman got a reduced fee. No, they didn't. That's how you would strengthen their argument. So yeah, that's actually a really good example, and I'm glad you guys came up with so many good answers. Let me just say one other thing before I move on, just as a recap, that the assumption should be something that's not stated, but is something that you need to know to connect the main point and the reasons. And then if you show the assumption is true, that strengthens. If you show the assumption is false, that weakens. To be the assumption, it really has to do both. And this example is in the official guide. You can look it up. It's exercise left for the reader to figure out where those are. Okay, so let's do a multiple choice example now. You guys have been waiting long enough. It's fair that you get to do one. So down below here, we have the question stem. So the question will always be broken away from the rest of the text. My recommendation is read the question stem first, so that way you'll know immediately what type of question it is, whether it's assumption, weaken, strengthen, or something else. Okay, so we see it's an assumption, refers to the government spokesman's argument. The word therefore will help indicate the conclusion or the main point. And I will let you guys have about, not a full 2 minutes, a little bit less, about 90 seconds. And I'm going to turn off so you guys can maximize the screen and then choose the best answer. Oh, and you can type your answer into the question box. Okay, 90 seconds. Okay, so please choose an answer. You go ahead and type that in. Okay, so I've gotten 3 different answers so far. I've gotten D, C, and B. And let me just, should I say? Yeah, I have to say. So none of those are correct. None of those are correct. So this type of question, as a kind of a paradigm, if I had to sort of generally state what this question is about, it's about a problem and solution. That's the general structure of this reasoning, right? And so the first part of this is they say that if you increase the interest rates, right, that's the way to recoup the loan money. All right. Then there's this part here where it says in the state of Aitulia, they've actually promised not to raise interest rates. So that means they actually can't do this because of this freaking promise. That's too bad. So then they come up with plan B. Plan B. I just said 2 here. So the second plan is to reduce the lifetime of the loan as a way to recoup the student loans. Okay, so we need to be able to evaluate whether this plan will actually achieve these loans or not. And we definitely got to pay special attention to what was stated and what was not stated. Now, about the choices, A here really does not make sense. So, and nobody chose A, so that's fine. But choice A basically says that they are against the plan. Well, if they're against the plan, that's not really evidence that the plan is going to work. It's also a little bizarre. Actually, the plan could work even if they were against it. So it's not even evidence to weaken either way. B is actually just weird. The thing about B is it actually kind of mixes the two plans together. So it talks about raising interest rate payments if they were increased in proportion to loan duration. Okay, so there's a lot going on here that's wrong. So first of all, if you study finance, duration and lifetime are not the same thing. I'm going to ignore that. That's way too technical. So if we just assume that duration and life mean the same thing. B is talking about increasing the duration or the life of the loan. The plan in the question is talking about decreasing the life of the loan. So that's opposite. Second thing is, B also talks about raising interest rate payments at the same time as you increase the life of the loan. But we've already been told that they can't increase the interest rates because they made a promise not to do that. So that's not possible. The third thing is choice B really is a third plan. It's a third plan that mixes the two plans that we've already talked about. So B, it doesn't work in a lot of different ways. Now, a couple of people chose C and D, and C and D I'm actually going to kind of put together because they both have the same problem, which is they talk about beliefs and wishes, but wishes are not the same thing as actual success. So C says they're eager to recoup the loan money. Well, that's what a problem is. A problem is a thing that you want to solve, right? D, same problem. They want to do it by the least traumatic means possible. Okay, so this is their problem. They want to solve it. That tells you nothing about whether this specific way of solving the problem is actually going to work. Okay, so those are gone. What's left? So very few people predict choice E based on the original question. It's a subtle, but it's there. We were told they made a promise not to raise the interest rates. Then they say, but let's decrease the life of the loan instead. But do we know if they're able to do that? Do we know if they actually made any similar promises about the life of the loan? If they have made a promise, then they wouldn't be able to do this, right? So we need to know that they have not promised anything about the life of the loan. And if they've, so let's talk about what strengthens and weakens here, right? So if E is true, and there's no promise, that means everything is good because it means they're allowed to do this. It would recoup the loan money faster, and that would strengthen the argument. On the other hand, if they promise not to change, the life of the loan, it means that they can't do this plan either, and that would weaken the argument. So E is something that we need to know, right? Once we know whether they've made a promise or not relates to whether they're allowed to do something or not, then we need to know this about this other plan, just like we knew it for the first plan. And so this is a pretty subtle answer, but if you limit the other choices, it's the last one, and of course it is the one that you do need to know. Okay, so yeah, so B, yeah, it's too complicated. Any question about that one? So just so you know like what my teaching is about and like what the class is about, like these types of critical reasoning questions should all fit into one of a small number of paradigms. Like the previous question we talked about in terms of cause and effect. This one we talked about in terms of problem and solution. So there's a limited number of about 3 or 4 different common paradigms like this of patterns of reasoning that they use. Getting good at critical reasoning involves learning what those patterns are, being able to spot them quickly in a question, and then knowing what kind of answer is required to fit that pattern for a particular type of question. And so you're not just kind of fumbling around blindly, just reading all 5 answers and panicking. You actually have a plan for the question because you know you're looking at a problem and a solution. You know you're evaluating this solution. You're trying to determine whether that solution is feasible or not. And then you can go to choice E pretty quickly because it jumps out as it fits this pattern. Okay. So this question asks you to find an alternative explanation. Usually what that means in GMAT world is they want you to weaken the argument. Because you're trying to find some kind of alternative, you're trying to weaken the explanation that was already given. Okay. I'll give you guys about 90 seconds here, see if you can find the best alternative. Okay, so so far I've gotten a string of D's in the correct in the question box, and D is the correct answer. So pat yourself on the back if you picked D. Aha, placing your bet after the post, huh? Okay, so yeah, D is the correct answer here, and it is an explanation. Usually when you see explanations, whoops, that's weird. Usually when you see explanations, it's about cause and effect. That's what explanations are. So what is the cause and what is the effect? Well, the cause is whether they buy a 1-time versus a 5-time pass, right? And the effect is whether they show up 99% of the time or whether they show up 25% of the time, right? And so the argument is saying it's because they're aware of the cost. Well, or is it something else? So to weaken the argument, you want to find some other reason. And by the way, because the original explanation talked about the cost, you definitely want to stay away from this. It should not be about the awareness of the cost. You got to come up with something new, right? You got to come up with something else, whatever that might be, from the 5 answer choices. Okay, so A is about the price. It says it's slightly cheaper. Okay, that's not the most world's startling statement. B talks about how long they continue at the gym. doesn't talk about the percentage of the passes that they use, so that's not relevant. C actually is sort of an opposite answer in some sense. Like if they're not only getting the 5 passes cheaper, but they also get a gift certificate. Like now I'm really confused. Why is it only 25%? It should be higher than 25% if they're getting that free gift certificate. So C is actually opposite. D is fine. So D just said they do it immediately before. So same day, same time. There's no chance that they cannot use the pass because they're right there at the door at that moment. D is fine. And then E, whether there's enough equipment or not, might have to do with the convenience or fun of the class, but it has nothing to do with the cost or the awareness of the cost or whether they show up or not. So D is clearly the best explanation here, the best alternative explanation. Okay, any questions about that one? Okay. Oh, about A. Well, so first of all, like I said, because it's the alternative explanation, you do not want to talk about the one explanation. So talking about the cost is automatically not what you want to be talking about. Okay, maybe if you're trying to strengthen, you might want to talk about the cost, but not if you're trying to weaken. If you're trying to weaken, you want to talk about something new. Like, what is the alternative? What is it? How else could this happen? You need to give something different to explain, right? Second thing is, when you say it's only slightly cheaper, like, okay, so what if the cost of a one-time pass is, let's say $14.50, and the cost of 5 passes is $68.50. Like, how much cheaper is it? Like, can you calculate that in your head? Like, would that even be a thing that people care about? Like, if they, so like if it's just saying it's slightly cheaper, kind of leaves me wondering, would people notice? Would they care? Or maybe they would. I don't know. Like, it kind of go either way. So this is kind of a weasel word. Like, you don't really understand. It's for GMAT. Let me just say that if they use the word slightly in a question, it's going to be a trap answer because it is smaller, but how much smaller? Is it small enough to make a difference? It's unclear. Okay, moving on. So again, reading the question stem first. The conclusion, blah, 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 is based on the assumption that, and you have 5 assumptions. So here, the word therefore helps indicate the conclusion. And you have 90 seconds. Good luck. Okay, so I have a couple answers coming in already. I have a few. So you go ahead and type your answer in. I'll start explaining just a little bit first. So don't change your answer in that situation. So again, it's really a cause and effect type pattern. So first sentence is really background information. Venture capital, they invest in a lot of different companies. They expect most of them to fail. But then a few of them, they get a huge return. And that's what venture capital really is. It's very high risk, but very high reward. So then about the individual companies, this is really just background information, by the way. So if you don't know what the term venture capital means, now you know. It means very high risk, very high reward. But then they get more specific. They say, however, usually a word like however is an intensifier. So it increases the emphasis at that point in the argument. Okay, I see a string of right answers going. That's great. Optimism and positivity are keys to success in the startup industry. No startup wants to admit that it's on its way towards failure. So here's what you know about management in the startup industry. So I'm just going to abbreviate here. You should do this for yourself during the real test for sure. MGMT for management. Management is very, very optimistic. They have to be in order to be able to succeed. And the effect here is that venture capital firms remain uncertain about the status of their investments. Okay, so the venture capital firms, you can paraphrase this a little bit in different ways. I'll say that they don't know what's going on. Okay. So how is this cause and effect? Well, the information is coming from management. That's the cause. The knowledge is the effect, or maybe the lack of knowledge that the investors have is the effect. Okay, and then of course you can say that there's no other cause. Although in this case, maybe information might be the better word than the word cause, but it's still the same relationship. Okay, so what have the people been choosing? Basically, it's been D, 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 D. Yes, and so D here is the correct answer. Choice A is in some ways actually opposite. Usually when something is transparent, it means it's easier to get knowledge about that organization. So A is actually opposite, would probably even weaken if it was true. B, nice opinion here. What should happen? Well, unfortunately, this argument is saying that this doesn't happen because the management is so optimistic that they're biased and therefore they only give positive information to the investors. But what should happen and what does happen are definitely separate things. C is kind of similar. The threat of failure is always good because it helps them maintain their focus. Well, that's actually not necessarily so. I mean, first of all, the threat of failure forces them to be optimistic. And if they're optimistic, that might give them some bias when they give their information to the investors. That's actually a danger. It's not necessarily always good. So C is not necessarily true either. D, we need to know that the investors obtain their information from no other source. So if the management is completely optimistic and they're just always giving the biased positive information to the investors, and the investors have no other source, so let's just kind of map out what D says here. So if D is true, they have no other source, then of course they're not going to know what's going on. And that will strengthen the argument. It means that they will not know. And then if it's false, this is really the interesting thing. This is what you should be thinking about. So if they do have another source, right? Like if they have another way of finding out what's going on in the company besides talking to management, then maybe they would have the ability to actually know what's going on anyway. And that would weaken the conclusion. And this is definitely what you want from an assumption. You want something that both strengthens and weakens if it's true or false. And then E, lots of bad things about E. So first of all, this phrase, less concerned, means that you don't care. But the argument is that they don't know. Saying that you don't know and don't care are definitely not the same thing. So this is actually irrelevant. Truth versus the actual results. Yeah, all this stuff is off topic. D is the correct answer. I would say these questions are From the point of view of the GMAT, probably easy/medium, medium easy. But once you get trained on this pattern of cause and effect and no other cause, then these types of questions start getting a lot easier anyway. So, but I wouldn't worry about it so much in terms of like what's easy or difficult is sometimes subjective. It's based on your opinion, your abilities, your experience. That's what makes things seem easy or difficult to you. It's not necessarily what the GMAT considers easy or difficult. Okay. Okay, so we got one more, and let me go to the questions down first, as always. So the argument depends on which of the following. This is another way of them saying that they're asking for the assumption. So saying that the argument depends on something is the same as saying the argument assumes something. It's basically another assumption question. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys work. I'll give you again about 90 seconds. Okay, so go ahead and put your final answer in. So it looks like about 60% chose A, and then around a vote or two for D, B, C. Okay, A is the correct answer. I'll tell you that right now. So this is a kind of a variation of cause and effect. Maybe I'll explain a little bit more in a moment, but it's a variation in a couple ways. So one is actually there's more than one step in the cause and effect. So it's not just like X causes Y. It's like X causes Y, Y causes Z. So it has kind of multiple stages of cause and effect. That's an indicator that it is considered a slightly higher level of difficulty. The other thing that's a kind of a twist on this one is that it's not an explanation, it's a prediction. So just to be clear on that distinction between an explanation and a prediction, with an explanation, the effect is known, you're arguing about the cause. What are the different possible causes? With a prediction, the cause is known, but the effect is unknown. So you know what you're going to do, but you don't know what the outcome is going to be, and you're going to argue about the outcome. So this type of question is, in fact, a prediction. It says they will become more dirty. So we do have we do know the cause. The ultimate effect is the thing we're going to argue about. Right. So what is this this chain of cause and effect? So the reasoning is that we put a snack bar in the lobby, what's going to happen? People will start bringing more snacks into the theater. Okay. So notice it's a different location. So the snack bar is going to be in the lobby, but they're talking about people bringing more snacks into the theater, like that's the actual hall where people are going to watch the movie or play. And then the last effect is that the theater will become more dirty, right? The furniture will get more dirty. Okay, so just go over what I've written here, just to kind of confirm that that's really what the thinking is behind this argument, right? If we put a snack bar in the lobby and people eat more snacks in the theater, then the furniture in the theater will get dirty more quickly, right? So it's a chain of cause and effect, not just one event and another event, but it's a sequence of events, right? So where do you need to analyze? So specifically, I would look at what has been stated in the argument and what has not been stated. So for instance, this sentence right here is stated in the argument directly. What that means is this should be considered fact, right? Because it was given to you in the argument, all the information that they supply you, but then when they state it directly, is considered fact. It's true, you can't touch it. And that relationship is this part right here, between bringing more snacks into the theater and having the furniture get more quickly. So what I'd say is, just as kind of a quick check, is that this relationship, for sure, we already know is true. Now this other relationship about putting the snack bar in the lobby and having people bring more snacks in the theater. So again, there is a shift, because one's in the lobby, the other one's in the theater. Where do they talk about that? Actually, if you look at the argument and you read it very carefully, it never says anything about this link. It says that we'd increase revenue, which is nice, but we shouldn't do it. It's an opinion. That putting the snack bar would not be in our best interest, but they don't actually say that this is true, that putting the snack bar in the lobby will lead to more snacks in the theater. So we need to know that. Where do we get that? We get it from choice A. And choice A says, if we put a snack bar in the lobby, patrons will consume more snacks in the theater as a result. So this is something that we need to know, right? And again, if it's true, that would strengthen the argument, because it would just complete this chain of cause and effect. On the other hand, if A was false, that would weaken the argument. So for instance, maybe we put a snack bar in the lobby and people consume the snacks in the lobby before they go into the theater, right? Maybe you put a rule up that says that they have to do that or something. Well, that would weaken the argument, because there'd be no way for the furniture to get dirty if you do that. And so A, we definitely need to know. Now about the other answers, someone did pick B, but I think B weakens the argument. So B says that basically you can let them take the snacks in there anyway, and it won't make the furniture dirty. So B is weakening. C is really a different thing completely, talking about banning them. That's not related to the prediction of what will happen if we put a snack bar in the lobby. D is a good trap answer. A lot of people like D. At least one person picked D. So D is talking about, is there a different way that the theater might get dirty? Well, there's lots of possible threats out there. We're not trying to identify all of them. What we're trying to figure out is whether this specific action will have the predicted effect. And so this is not about the action of putting a snack bar in the lobby. It's actually irrelevant. And then E, what their primary concern should be, this is definitely an opinion, does not tell us about the cause and effect linkage. So A is the best. So again, as I said, like, right, so it has to make it stronger if it's true, right? B, yeah, B is bad, and weaken if it's false. Right. B is bad because it weakens if it's true. And and that's the opposite of what you'd like. So I mean, I do definitely agree that B is relevant, but the way it's constituted, it's actually backwards. Yeah. But yeah, so this is this is really the game for GMAT critical reasoning, is understanding these reasoning patterns, and understanding how the different reasoning patterns interact with the different question types. That's really what the class is all about. So I think I'm going to back out here. You got 10 more minutes of Q&A and also I think a promotion, hopefully. And I'll back out here and turn it back over to the rest of the Ready For staff. So thanks everybody for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. It's quite fun today, and good interaction. So thank you very much.